friends, and welcome back to Every Arnold Movie Ever, Episode 8. The year was 1982. Conan the Barbarian was holding its own in a crowded, legendary summer box office, and Arnold Schwarzenegger had finally become a leading man and a household name. Arnold had signed a 10-year contract with Dino De Laurentiis to keep producing Conan movies, which provided Arnold a security blanket should the franchise remain profitable. And by December of that year, De Laurentiis already announced a sequel was in the works. But by the time a script would be approved, Arnold's schedule was starting to fill up. He just signed on to star in this B-movie from the director of Piranha 2. Good luck with that. And was set to start filming in 1983. But Dino wanted another Conan movie first. So he executed an option in Arnold's contract, which tied him up for 9 months to film Conan the Destroyer. That little B-movie would have to wait. The story was developed once again by Jerry Conway, a Marvel writer, and Roy Thomas, the Marvel Comics Conan writer, who put together the original draft of Conan the Barbarian before Oliver Stone dumped a bunch of cocaine all over it. The script writing duties this time were handed to Stanley Mann. Stanley Mann. It's his real name. Stan the Man's previous credits included The Eye of the Needle, Omen 2, and Firestarter. Unfortunately, John Milius was unavailable to direct the sequel, or maybe more accurately, according to the book The Cinema of John Milius, Milius and De Laurentiis had creative disagreements, and Milius was out. De Laurentiis still wanted to keep the visual continuity, though, so he hired Richard Fleischer, who directed a movie called The Vikings in 1958, and that was a major source of inspiration for Milius's Conan. So they figured, well, let's just go to the source. Fleischer had a wide and varied filmography, from Dr. Dolittle to 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Soylent Green, and Tora, Tora, Tora. He was versatile and malleable. He could never really be pinned down to one genre, but that also meant his style was kind of like a chameleon. It wasn't very distinct. He didn't have that signature imprint of a larger-than-life personality like John Milius. Now, if you're wondering what Milius' second Conan movie would have been, in a 2014 interview with Mandatory, when asked what his second Conan film would have been, Milius gave a mealy-mouthed response.
Conan the sequel would be epic and brutal and a very serious movie. We need to know what happens to Conan when he finally becomes king. The first one was a revenge story. Conan avenges the death of his family. And the next one should have been equally as important in its scope. The story was meant to have gravity and focus.
Super specific. Sounds good, buddy. For his part, Fleischer liked the original Conan the Barbarian a lot. He felt Milius did an excellent job, but had one criticism. It was a heavy picture, but then the theme was very heavy, and it was imaginative in its design. Its problem came because it, for the most part, lacked humor. There were some jokes, but too much of the film was unrelieved drama. And so, without Milius to lord over production, Conan the Destroyer would have a lighter touch and more involvement from the studio. According to Arnold, this was a mistake. Somebody actually calculated that if Conan the Barbarian had been rated PG instead of R, it would have sold 50% more tickets. The idea was that the more mainstream and generally acceptable the movie, the better it would succeed. But you couldn't make Conan the Barbarian into Conan the Babysitter. Toning him down to PG might broaden the audience at first, but it would undermine the franchise, because the hardcore Conan fans would be upset. You have to satisfy your best customers first. Arnold credits Raffaella De Laurentiis, Dino's daughter, for some really unique casting. Much like in Barbarian, when Milius cast non-actors in major roles, De Laurentiis hired Grace Jones, a model and singer and overall 80s icon, for the role of the warrior Zula. This was her first big role to give her mainstream exposure. Also cast was full-time sex haver who played basketball on the side, Wilt the Stilt Chamberlain, in his one and only acting role. And honestly, he's not too bad. It helps that he isn't really asked to do much, but yeah, he's fine. He's fine. These casting choices definitely add some much-needed flavor to Destroyer, particularly Grace Jones, who is incredibly watchable. Filming began in November 1983 in Mexico, in some of the same locations as David Lynch's Dune, which was shooting at the exact same time, and that's very convenient because I just talked about David Lynch's Dune in my review of Dune 2021. Conan the Destroyer opens with Conan praying to Crom with an upgraded Wheel of Pain necklace. Nice. But that's not the only thing he's traded out. He's traded out his best bud Subutai for an even goofier sidekick thief named Malik, played by Tracy Walter, who you may recognize as Bob from Batman, Or if you're my friend Bunker, who loves City Slickers, Cookie from City Slickers. He reminds me a little of the role Johnny Knoxville played in The Last Stand, a movie I will cover around 2025. As Conan prays, they're interrupted by a group of royal guards led by Bambata, Wilt the Stilt. Before anyone asks any questions, a fight breaks out, and that starts a recurring motif in Destroyer. Fight first, ask questions never. We waste no time just getting into action, and it's a lot of stabbing and horse face punching. And you also notice Arnold is already a lot mouthier.
Why are they trying to kill us?
Maybe they want to capture us and torture us to death.
It took a half hour before he spoke his first words in Conan the Barbarian. By comparison, Conan the Destroyer is practically a David Mamet play. It turns out Bambata is a royal guard for Queen Taramis, who has tracked down Conan to take on a mission for her. In exchange, she promises to bring Valeria back to life.
Look at the shrine. See what you are praying for.
Valeria. What I want, you cannot give me.
Yes, I can.
You can bring back the dead?
Do as I ask of you, and I will.
And the entire movie is pinned on this emotional hook, which is decent if backward-looking. I appreciate the continuity from Conan the Barbarian, and to show a little vulnerability from Conan, but there's an inherent problem with this framing device, and I'll discuss that a little bit later. And then 10 minutes in, we are given a clear indication that the tone of Destroyer is going to be wildly different from Barbarian, and it involves a callback to the previous movie. There's a scene where Conan and Malik are taken through the village, they're being hailed as heroes, and they're met by a camel. And Malik asks Conan,
Doesn't that animal look familiar?
Conan says,
I think it does.
then apologizes to the camel,
I'm sorry about what happened the last time.
and we all know what he's apologizing for. His favorite pastime, camel clocking. The camel does not accept the apology and spits on him. So Conan doubles down and bops the camel again. And I have questions. First of all, Malik is the one to mention the camel, as if he has first-hand knowledge of the camel punching incident, but Malik was not there for it. That was Subutai. Is this scene insinuating that Malik and Subutai are the same person? Or did Conan tell Malik the story about the one time he was high on Black Lotus and fucked up a camel? Even if that's the case, how does Malik know this is the exact same camel?
Doesn't that animal look familiar?
Or was he just kind of joking and then it turned out it was actually the camel? Because it's pretty clear they're saying this is the exact same camel that Conan punched. Did Conan describe the camel to Malik in startling detail? Does it have like a distinct birthmark? How would he even remember it that closely if he couldn't even stand up straight? How does Malik know anything about this damn camel? Second, Conan apologizes to a camel? Conan, the murdering barbarian destroyer, apologizes to a camel in a very comedic cadence.
I'm sorry about what happened the last time.
He's practically winking at the camera. Hey, remember that camel bit from Barbarian? So do we. But also, like, Conan apologizing to anyone? That seems completely out of character, let alone a camel. This is just one of those weird fan service things that you see sometimes that makes no sense in the world the characters are living in. It's like a cute little moment, a ping of recognition from the audience, but it chips away at the credibility of Conan. And it's not even part of a greater scene. It's the centerpiece of that scene, existing only to include this reference. It's wild. Did we really need camel closure? Well, we got it. Conan and Malik enter Queen Taramis's place, and I just love how they roll up right on their horses. And they're given their quest. Escort Princess Jenna, spelled with a rogue H thrown in there, to grab a magical gem that can only be handled by a virgin. She happens to be one. Anyone else who touches it will die. They need the gem that will point them to a horned crystal that will help them summon the dream god Dagoth. Why they need to do this, I don't know. It's not really clear. But you can guess why, and the reasons are not positive. Even less positive, Queen Taramis informs Bambata that he should protect Princess Jenna's virginity at all costs, which is a hilariously unintentional in-joke. And in a nice complication, Once the quest is complete, Bambata is to kill Conan. So, Conan, Bambata, Malik, and Princess Jenna set off to find the gem. Now, Conan's rolling with a deep entourage this time around, but he's just getting started. Because the second he finds out they may have to confront a wizard, he's like, yo, you know what we need? More people.
There are rules to every game.
I believe you, but there's magic in this game, and I have to be able to fight it with magic.
Akira.
So he goes to find Akiro, a returning Mako from the original. And I like the idea that Conan is like, sorry bro, I don't fuck with wizards. But again, it's a little betrayal of his character because now he lacks faith in his own steel. But the entire first movie was about the riddle of steel. But hey, having a shit ton of characters on a big journey never hurts a movie, right? Right? When they find Akiro, he's about to be eaten by cannibals, but this time around they are not having an orgy, so Conan jumps in there, cuts the head off a cannibal, but, you know, since this is PG, it's like a nice, clean, fun beheading. Whee! And now that our crew is assembled, Conan, Bambata, Malik, Akiro, and Princess Jenna can finally set off to find the... Wait, hold on. They have to come across Zula, Grace Jones, being held captive. And Princess Jenna feels bad and asks Conan to free her, and he's like, yeah, sure, at this point, whatever. Come on. And now that our crew is assembled, Conan, Bambata, Malik, Akiro, Zula, and Princess Jenna finally set off to find the gem. But just as they get to their destination, they all get a little sleepy and decide to take a nap right outside the creepy Crystal Palace.
We leave now.
In the morning, we must rest.
My thinking exactly.
And this is one of my favorite parts. While they nap, the wizard Thothamon turns into a weird bird and steals Princess Jenna. And when everyone wakes up, they're like, where could she be? My goodness, I wonder where she could be. Gee, do you think it's the giant castle with the evil wizard inside who knows we're coming to steal his gem? So, Conan and co. invade the Ice Palace. It's very cold in there. And Fleischer says his one complaint that he had from the first Conan movie was that Conan wasn't topless nearly enough. So he really wanted to show off Arnold's body in this one. And yeah, he certainly does. Even in very inconvenient situations. Like, come on, man. Give the guy a tank top or something. Now, Conan eventually finds the wizard that's half beast, half man boobs. And we get some serious wrestling moves here. We get a body slam, a Cesaro swing. He even sets up for a power bomb. And also, his man boobs turn red in one part. Never understood that. Conan accidentally breaks a mirror, and then he realizes that the mirrors are the monster's weakness, so he shatters a bunch of them, and we get a scene that mirrors Enter the Dragon. Haha. And for the last blow, we get this hilariously overdramatic moment where Conan can choose between two mirrors. One has the wizard behind it, the other has his friends. Which will he choose?
Which one?
My God, if he throws at his friends, they'll all die. And they're all watching this, and no one thinks to go like, hey, guys, should we just take a couple steps back in case he throws the sword over here? Nope. They are committed to watching this play out, and whatever fate has in store for them, they're going to take it. Luckily, Conan makes the right choice, kills the wizard, the princess grabs the gem, and they're on their way. Outside the castle, Conan is suddenly attacked by Taramis's guards in the plot to kill him. Conan survives, and Bambata, instead of actually doing the job himself, just plays dumb. He's like, I don't know, oh my God, what happened? Then we get this little interlude here playing up Jenna's horniness.
Could there ever be anyone else but her?
Another queen? Blood on your knife. Not on your life.
And a drunk Conan giving us the closest thing to a catchphrase we have.
I suppose nothing hurts you.
Only pain.
Although I know somebody who might take issue with that, Conan.
Do you enjoy pain?
Pain don't hurt.
From there, the gem leads them to the jeweled horn. They pick that up pretty easily, but then they're stopped by the keepers of the horn, led by outlet store Christopher Lee. He reveals that the princess will be sacrificed to resurrect Dagoth, but as is customary in this movie, Conan isn't really interested in hearing words, so he just starts slashing.
Enough talk!
Akiro finally gets a moment, I guess, when he plays tug of war with this fish. And Christopher Lee turns out to be a real showboat with his hand gestures. Bambata escapes with Jenna, and Conan realizes he's been duped.
Taramis planned it from the beginning. We get the horn, her guards will kill us, and Bambata takes the girl and the horn back to her.
And her promise to you?
A lie.
Valeria isn't coming back, and the emotional center completely drops out, and we're left with Conan simply wanting to stop Taramis and save Jenna, a person he kinda sorta knows. We finally get our showdown with Conan and Bambata, and it reminds me of another Bruce Lee matchup with another basketball player, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Although here, Conan dispatches him surprisingly easily. Azula saves Jenna before she could be sacrificed, so instead of turning into the dream god, Dagoth turns into like this big old poop monster. It looks absurd, but his little head is kind of cute. It's kind of surprising because it was designed by Carlo Rambaldi, who gave us E.T., the xenomorph head in Alien, and the sandworms in Dune. He must have just been tired from doing all of those, because here he just gives us a dude in a rubber suit. But, interesting fact, it's not just any dude. It's a giant dude. Andre the Giant, dude. Yeah, Andre the Giant is Dagoth. Crazy. Now, Dagoth ends up killing Taramis, which takes agency and vengeance away from Conan, but at least Conan gets a gross, memorable horn-ripping moment. Then we get our Star Wars throne room scene, then Jenna tries one more time to jump Conan's bones.
Rule shut is all with me.
I will have my own kingdom, my own queen.
He shut her down this entire movie, and he's just like, we're not going to start now. Then we get an epilogue that echoes Conan the Barbarian, and the promise of another story that never gets told. And that's Conan the Destroyer. As I mentioned in my Conan the Barbarian review, growing up, Conan the Destroyer was my Conan, if only because I was too young to watch Barbarian, and this played constantly on TV because it could. And for a kid who doesn't know the Conan that came before, this is a silly, entertaining movie. It's perfectly geared towards kids. But if you saw Barbarian first, obviously this would be a massive letdown. This one adds more humor, even more crazy beasts, and a lot more characters, which don't really add up to much, then just lets them run around aimlessly in this fantasy world. You can feel Fleischer's lack of signature in Conan the Destroyer. Milius brought extensive knowledge and research and an overarching philosophy to Barbarian. Destroyer is merely a fetch quest with not one, but two MacGuffins, kind of like the 80s equivalent of, I don't know. Let's find a random dagger that will point us to a wayfinder that will then point us to a hidden army. And oh, by the way, you're the daughter of the Emperor, who somehow returned. But, you know, Lando. Sorry. Sorry. That's a different video. Tangent over. Now, obviously, due to the nature of fetch quests, Destroyer feels less focused than a vengeance quest to kill the man who murdered his family. Speaking of, even though Destroyer has 5 different antagonists throughout the movie, none of them are a worthy adversary to Conan. Bambata is interesting because he's a double agent, but he's killed easily. Tothamon and his Tungi alter ego, he's easy once you figure out his gimmick. Dagoth is fine, but holds no meaning. And then Queen Taramis, the person pulling the strings, doesn't even get her comeuppance at the hands of Conan. She is nowhere near as threatening as Thulsa Doom, her motivations are muddled, and she doesn't get to do any cool monologuing. Conan needs a worthy adversary to be interesting. Somebody has to challenge him. The idea that wizards are his weak point could be cool, but since he's rolling 5 deep, he can just point to any one of his friends and be like,
My dagger is gone, you kill him!
Conan and a ragtag team with individual strengths, kind of like a fantasy Mission Impossible team. It's cool on paper, but it waters his character down so early in the series, especially when most of the other characters are just along for the ride or they're there to help with one specific problem. The movie also makes the pivotal decision to make the hook. If Conan completes this quest, Taramis will get Valeria back. And it's a promise it just can't keep. Once the audience and Conan realize it won't happen, the movie loses all steam and purpose. I like that he was driven by emotion other than revenge, but it's a huge step backwards to not give Conan something new and tangible to achieve. The air is let out of the balloon. There's no payoff to the Valeria setup, and the movie suffers overall. And I think this feels worse because there are only 2 Conan movies, and the other one is deadly serious. Destroyer would make a lot more sense if you looked at this as one in a series of James Bond-esque escapades. If they made 6 Conan movies, the tone could shift dramatically from film to film. Then you could see it as Conan's overarching journey from a wanderer who enters a story, does his Conan thing, then moves on, ever in search of his own kingdom to rule. Instead, this ends up being Conan Light. Kiddie Conan. It's fun, dumb, fleeting entertainment. And, I should mention, Basil Polidorus kills it again with this score. It reflects the mood of the movie. It has more of an upbeat adventure theme than the epic feel of the original, but that's not a knock. I think you can put this side by side with the Conan the Barbarian score, and you'd be hard-pressed to pick a winner. It's great. And of course, we have to talk about Arnold's performance. In this one, they try to bake in a little more of his natural charisma and personality. Sometimes that comes across as a little goofy, but it's also could be endearing. Unfortunately, outside of that Valeria beat in the beginning, he isn't given anything emotional to sink his teeth into. It feels like a phantom limb of emotions from Barbarian, a step backwards for the character. It's hard for someone to grow when they're pining for a dead person. He does have a ton more dialogue, and as we saw in that camel scene, he delivers it in more of a star performance than an actual character. It's very broad, and there's nothing as powerful as his speeches in Barbarian, mostly because the stakes are so low for him here. He still owns the Conan character, and he looks more ripped than ever, but there's so much going on around him, he just doesn't have much to work with. Conan the Destroyer was released on June 29th, 1984 in 4th place. Ooh. Behind an unstoppable Ghostbusters, Gremlins, and also new that week, Cannonball Run 2, directed by his old buddy from The Villain, Hal Needham. Wow. What happened to 50% more tickets from a PG rating? Funnily enough, on July 1st, 1984, the PG-13 rating was implemented. Got it in just under the wire. And PG-13, little history lesson, was invented by Steven Spielberg, who was getting dinged for Temple of Doom and Gremlins as not being very PG. So he said, well, maybe there's an intermediate rating, huh? Ironically enough, the very first PG-13 movie was Red Dawn, directed by John Milius. Now, reviews for this one were worse than Barbarian, except for another 3-star review from Ebert. Man, Ebert loved Conan. And for the release, Arnold went all out to sell it. He went on as many talk shows and interviews he could. He also pushed for international promotion, knowing half the box office take of the first one came from overseas. In part because of that, Destroyer did better than Barbarian worldwide, but dipped 23% in the US. The family-friendly angle just didn't work. Following the lukewarm reception, Arnold says, "I felt like I was finished with Conan. It was going nowhere. I sat down with Dino De Laurentiis and told him definitively that I didn't want to do any more prehistoric movies, only contemporary movies. It turned out he had cooled off on Conan too." A proposed third sequel, Conan the Conqueror, was supposed to film in 1987, but Arnold's contract with De Laurentiis expired, and Arnold had moved on. But if you want to know what Conan the Conqueror might have looked like, at your own peril, you can go watch 1997's Call the Conqueror, starring former syndicated Hercules star, current garbage person who yells at Starbucks employees like a fucking lunatic, Kevin Sorbo. That movie used another one of Howard's characters, but handed him the leftover Conan script from the second sequel. And if you're on the fence about whether you should see Call the Conqueror, just know, Call rocks. That's not even a pool quote from a critic. That's the tagline. Call rocks. Call rocks in like giant font. Is that the most disconnected, most late 90s tagline you've ever heard?
As a soldier, he rocks. Cold.
Okay, let's get to the stats. Acting chops. Bit of a step back here. 5. Kill count. 25. Brings his total to 58. Catchphrase? Only pain. And here are the updated Arnold rankings. Cameos, Scavenger Hunt, and Long Goodbye. Number 6, maybe forever at the bottom, Hercules in New York. Number 5, The Villain. Number 4, Stay Hungry. Number 3, Conan the Destroyer. Number 2, Pumping Iron. Number 1, Conan the Barbarian. And that was that. Arnold never returned to the Conan role, except Dino did have a favor to ask. Before I hung up my broadsword for good, he said, why don't you just do, a cameo? He handed me a script called Red Sonja, which I'll be covering not next time, because Arnold had one more movie released in 1984, that little B movie I talked about earlier, and I'll be back. No, I'll be returning to talk about it next time. Yes, it's time for one of my favorite movies of all time, The Terminator. See you then.